When you're growing up in the Caribbean, sometimes, it depends on what is happening in your world. We have this perception that England, for example, is the motherland.
Hello and welcome to Obehi Podcast. I'm your host, Obehi A14, and I strongly believe that everyone has a story to share. Now let's get started with this episode.
Obviously, we're part of the Commonwealth, and we have a Governor General who reports to the Queen. He's kind of basically head of state and so on. And so we look to the fact that, okay, we've got lots of ancestors who have traveled over to England in particular, to Europe. They have fought in the different wars, they have contributed, and we're part of the Commonwealth. So sometimes as you grow up, depending on your, what families you're in, you're looking forward to visiting the UK, probably settling there for a while and seeing how you can experience life on a different side of the planet. So when I started my family, pretty early days, that was one of the things that we discussed together as a family. We wanted the opportunity to be world travelers. And it is something that we're gradually having the opportunity to say at this stage in our lives, a couple of years on, 15 or so years on, we are indeed world travelers. So we emigrated to the United Kingdom. My husband, who is a teacher myself, I was a teacher and guidance counselor at that time. We started looking around to see what were the opportunities in the UK. And there was a recruitment process going on. We learned about it through the newspapers. We went to the interviews. We were successful and we secured jobs as teachers in the UK. So we moved over to explore a new place to be, a new way of living, to see what does England in itself have to offer to a young family coming from the Caribbean. When you're coming from the Caribbean, you're used to tropical environments, lots of greenery and trees, and the temperatures are just cool. I grew up next to the beach in Portland. So therefore, there's just this beautiful scenery every day, walking to school and so on. But you get to the UK, and we actually arrived in December. It was bitterly cold, beyond what we really could imagine. And just the setup of how things were in terms of traveling, even from the airport to where we were going to live, just your housing structure, everything was just so close. It felt close. All the houses were kind of connected together. It was just different. It really was different. With time, we kind of explored and we found a foresty area in which we then settled and lived. And it was more feeling a little bit more like Jamaica, not in terms of the temperature, but definitely in terms of how things looked. So we had a lot of greenery around us. We could then walk to the park. We could walk to the meadows. We could just, enjoy nature a little bit more naturally and easily and outside your back door at your fingertips. But yeah, that was the first kind of difference that hit you. Beyond that, settling into school and then working in the education system here, a completely different kettle of fish. I enjoyed working with the students I worked with at the time. I started out in support. Even though I came over fully qualified as a guidance counselor, I started out as a support teacher. And that was beneficial for me because it helped me to understand how the system worked so I could guide my children as they grew up in the system and as they progressed through the system. But yes, doing it time, paying dues, that kind of expression, fine. But I just really like the idea that every situation in which you find yourself is just a great learning opportunity to develop and to direct you closer to your ideal self, closer to who you are really designed to be when you were placed on this planet, and just evolving and actualizing to be your best you. It's funny, life has a way of taking you right back around to what you're meant to do. I remember when I was in high school, I was exploring what it is that I wanted to do. But even before high school, I was sharing with someone this week, when I was in grade 5 in primary school, our teacher said to us, when you get back from lunch, I want you to share with the class what it is you want to do when you grow up. And so she went around the class one by one, one by one. We had to stand up, say what we wanted to do. And when it was my turn, I said, I want to help people solve their problems. And she said to me, I didn't expect you to say anything differently. She was actually, in tandem. She says, it's all over you. It's written all over you. And I really feel drawn to be a problem solver with certain kinds of things. It's probably just the way I see things. It's the way my brain processes things, but solutions tend to come. So that's where it started. When I got to the tail end of high school, I thought I'm going to do that by becoming a probation officer. So I went off to the police station, got information about how do I become a probation officer, all the things that would be involved. And I interviewed two police officers who were probation officers, and they told me about the job role. I was excited. So I applied for university, and they said at that time, you had to be a teacher for 5 years or be 25 years or older to be considered for being a probation officer, because it is something that required the law, being a part of the law and law enforcement. You had to be mature and responsible, the kinds of things you would be exposed to. The requirement, 25 years or older, or 5 years teaching experience. So then that's how I ended up in teaching initially. Loved teaching because I was absolutely in love with my high school English teacher. She was fantastic. So I went into a teacher's college and I did English just like my English teacher. I really loved it. I enjoyed that time. But along the way, the rules changed. You didn't have to be a teacher teaching for 5 years anymore. And by the time I got around to applying again, I started a family, had children, didn't go back into probation or social work, which it would lead me to. But because I was having children, I thought, okay, I applied and I got through, but they said, because your family is young, we would recommend you spend another year or two with your very young babies before getting into probation and social work. So I had to defer that again. And in that time, I thought I will keep myself busy. So I loved counseling. I love problem solving, and guidance and counseling is one of those ways you had the opportunity to help families, help students, help others to solve issues and just progress to be their best selves, right? So I did my undergrad in guidance and counseling, and then I started working as a guidance counselor. Loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it so much, really loved it. And then at that point, after practicing for about 2 to 3 years, my husband decided he wanted to move to the UK. So we came to the UK, and then I got back into education. And from there, I did a number of different roles that used up my counseling skills as well as as teaching. So I worked as a mentor, I worked as a student support advisor, and I just kept accessing roles that made use of my counseling skills. Then I volunteered as a children's counselor. Loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it. Really loved it. It was something that just really pulled at my heart. And I started going into things like working with charities. So I worked with like Women's Aid and supported families who were fleeing domestic violence and domestic abuse, offered in the community programs for the children who probably were experiencing these kinds of things in their homes, and giving them coping strategies, and things like that. And the experience here for me in England has been a phenomenal one. I've loved every leg of my journey here, every leg of my journey, whether that's been in school or not. And then from there, I started traveling the world again, and went back into education, went back into certain other things, teaching English as an additional language to speakers of other languages, whether that was speaking Arabic, Chinese, whatever. I started traveling again. And then I came back to the UK, and it was time to figure out, what will I get up to now that I'm here? And there was a pull inside me to go back to the original thing, helping people solve their problems. And that is how I worked my way back into coaching. So when I thought, okay, let's get some training going, I trained as a transformational coach. And what that means is I work with people to solve whatever their issues might be. I'll tell you about the type of people in my niche area, but I do work with people with any issues to assess the mindset around the issues that seem to be obstacles, things that are stopping them from moving from point A to point B. I work with them to close the gap so that they can actually achieve what they would like within a season of their life. It is not a one-off type session. We work through a number of sessions until they get to meeting the goals and the objectives they have in mind.
If you enjoy this podcast, make sure you subscribe so you never miss any of our future episodes. Rate and review Obehi Podcast and share with your friends who might need it. I remain Obehi Ewanfo. Thank you so much for listening and talk to you in the next episode.